Good morning, everyone. Thank you all very much for joining this webinar. As you may know, the Energy and Environment Alliance, where I'm the Chief Executive, is a not-for-profit organization. We were established to promote the highest environmental, social, and governance standards for the hospitality industry and to enable and help our industry to achieve net zero carbon in a scientifically robust and commercially viable way. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar, which marks the launch of a new report providing guidance to our industry on greenwashing. Now, the report was produced by the EEA's General Counsels Committee. We're a group of in-house counsels supported by international law firms, including DLA Piper, who took the lead on this timely and valuable work. And that's why I'm very pleased that today we have one of the lead authors of the report with us, John Wilkes. He's a partner at DLA Piper. He's also an enforcement and advertising expert. He's called upon by brands regularly to ensure compliance of their advertising campaigns with guidelines and rules. And he's also an experienced litigator who regularly defends regulatory complaints and copyright infringement actions for his clients. Welcome, John. I'm also very pleased that we have with us Nick Beresford. Nick is legal director at the Competition and Markets Authority. He advises mainly on consumer law enforcement, and he was part of the team who worked on the misleading green claims guidance. Prior to joining the CMA, Nick was a principal legal advisor at Ofcom, working mainly on consumer protection in the telecommunications sector. He's also held a number of other government legal roles. Nick, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We've also got two leaders from our industry. The first is Hadrian Beltrametti Walker, counsel at Kempinski Hotels and Resorts. Now, Hadrian not only is the counsel, but he leads the sustainability efforts and he chairs the group's sustainability committee. We're delighted that Hadrian is also a member of the EEA General Counsels Committee, and he serves on the advisory board of the Luxury Law Alliance. Welcome, Hadrian. And then last but certainly not least, one of the trailblazers of our industry in this area, Robert Godwin. Robert is a founder member of the Energy and Environment Alliance, and he's a passionate leader, really focused on real estate investment and development that makes a big difference. As I said, a real trailblazer, leader of the Lamington Group and Room 2 Hotels, focused on short and long stay accommodation with a goal of opening 5,000 keys under its Hometel brand by 2030. Robert prioritizes creating world-class brand user experiences, embracing technology, and being at the forefront of innovation, including sustainability, having opened the world's first whole life net zero hotel, and he'll tell us more about whole life net zero in the discussion part of this session. Robert, welcome. So now we're all introduced. Without any further ado, I just want to remind everyone who is participating, if you have any questions, you have a Q&A box. Please type your questions in there and raise your hand. We will come back to you once all the panelists have presented, and we really want to make sure that all your questions are answered. So please don't forget to put your questions into that Q&A box or raise your hand, and we will definitely come to you. But now to kick us off with the presentations, I'd like to hand over to John, who, as I said, is one of the lead authors of the report. So John, over to you.
Thanks very much for that kind introduction, Ufi. And it's a pleasure to be here on this webinar this morning and to have been involved with producing the EEA guidance, which we hope will be helpful to a number of you on the call. The guidance is on the subject of avoiding greenwashing. So if we could perhaps have the slides up, it would be good to start, I thought, with a definition of what might be understood by the term greenwashing. The issue with greenwashing is, of course, not with making claims about your business's environmentally friendly actions per se. It's about the word that's highlighted in red there. It's with making claims that are misleading or untrue or not capable of being proven about your business's environmental record. And interestingly, perhaps for this audience, the term was first coined as a reference to hotel industry practices by an environmentalist named Jay Westerfeld back in 1986. And Mr. Westerfeld was objecting specifically to a hotelier's practice of placing notices in hotel bathrooms asking guests to reuse their towels as part of their efforts to save the environment or to preserve the environment. And along the lines of the example you can see on the slide there. But Mr. Westerfeld's objection was that the sign was misleading because there was little to suggest that these hoteliers were interested in reducing their environmental impact more broadly, and he felt that this practice was driven more by a motivation to save costs on laundry bills. So if we could go into the next slide, please, and we'll now see on the right of your screen, you can see the Energy and Environment Alliance Greenwashing Guidance document, which is being launched today. The guidance is aimed to assist anybody involved in the hospitality industry with making statements in marketing or advertising about their business's environmental credentials. So it's relevant to marketing departments, to comms departments, to in-house lawyers, and so on. And it's not just designed to stop people making inaccurate statements, but it's intended to try and empower people to make true, substantiated statements about the positive steps their business has taken along this road. This will in turn help consumers make informed purchasing decisions based on environmental factors. So why do we think this guidance was necessary? Why is greenwashing an issue at all? So the first point I think to make is that it's clear that there are a lot of misleading environmental advertising claims out there. And as Nick could tell us in more detail, the CMA has led a coordinated global sweep at the beginning of this year by national consumer regulators. And they were looking at over 500 randomly selected websites making environmental claims. These weren't just in the hotel industry, but across different sectors. And the result of that survey concluded that 40% of the sites were making misleading claims in relation to environmental matters. So misleading claims are clearly a significant issue, but why does that actually matter? Well, at the risk of stating the obvious, it's, in my view, unethical to mislead the public as to your environmental record. But secondly, consumers are increasingly focused on environmental credentials. There can be significant consumer detriment if they choose to holiday at a particular hotel based on its low carbon credentials, if that information turns out to be untrue. Thirdly, there is a huge potential for brand damage. If the subject if a company is made the subject of credible accusations of greenwashing. We give some examples in our paper of where such allegations have led to significant reputational damage, such as the oil company that had the embarrassment of having to withdraw a major new ad campaign in the face of greenwashing allegations against it. And the next reason why it's important to pay attention to these issues is that regulators are increasingly focused on it, as we're going to come on to hear from the horse's mouth, as it were. I hope you don't mind the equine comparison, Nick. So there's obviously a risk of being investigated and potentially sanctioned if you're a company that makes unfounded environmental claims in your advertising. And then finally, there is also significant litigation risk. There is the potential for claims from consumers, investors, and others, particularly in the more extreme cases. Next slide, please. So the next question you might ask is whether there are laws against greenwashing. And I should probably point out here that the guidance is drafted with UK law particularly in mind, although it may well be of assistance to those in other jurisdictions as well. So in the UK, there is no specific law on greenwashing, but we have long had legal obligations in the UK not to mislead the public in advertising. And there are two parallel regimes that you can see referred to on the slide in front of you. You have the hard regulation of the the consumer protection from unfair trading regulations on the left, which is enforced by the CMA and trading standards, and prohibits certain misleading commercial practices. It's not specific to environmental claims, but relates to all kinds of claims and also broader commercial practices. But it certainly does apply to misleading environmental claims. The maximum penalty there, as you can see, in a worst case scenario, is very onerous, 2-year prison term or an unlimited fine. But there are a whole range of other sanctions that are available to the regulators that fall short of such draconian remedies. And then on the other hand, you have the overlapping regime of the CAP and BCAP codes, the CAP standing for the Committee of Advertising Practice, and the BCAP code is the broadcasting equivalent. So key requirements of those codes are that advertising must not be materially misleading, that the basis of environmental claims must be clear, and that absolute claims must be subject to a high level of substantiation. The penalty for breaching the code is that an adjudication will be published against the advertiser if the ASA, who's the regulator here, considers the matter to be sufficiently serious to merit an adjudication. So there are no fines per se, but an adverse adjudication will normally be picked up by the media and leads to adverse publicity, particularly in this realm of environmental claims. If we could go on to the next slide, please. So, as mentioned, the regulators in the UK and also in other jurisdictions are increasingly focusing on the area of environmental claims. The ASA is updating its guidance, monitoring proactively. The CMA, well, Nick's going to come on and talk about what the CMA are doing, but I just wanted to flag up the document that's on the right-hand side of the screen there, which is the CMA's guidance on environmental claims, which was released in September this year and is a very helpful 50-page guide to refer to. And I should probably mention that the EEA's guide is intended to be an easy to access and hotel sector focused document, which summarizes all the main provisions in relation to making environmental claims in advertising. And it also contains links to all of the other guidance that's available from the ASA and from the CMA. If we could go on to the next slide, please. And I just wanted to finish this section by picking on some of the practical tips that we give you in the EEA guidance, and just highlighting a few key points and hopefully give you the taste to dive into the guidance and learn more. So the first point here is the importance of using clear claim terms and consider whether it's necessary to qualify your claims. The regulator guidance and the adjudications of the ASA in this area make it clear that it's important to avoid vague and complex terminology. And in the bottom of the screen there, you can see a survey, a consumer survey that shows that vague terms are not just a problem with the regulator, but are also not liked by consumers, who said that vague terms such as organic, eco-friendly, green and natural were not likely to encourage them to purchase goods. So I think it makes sense from a commercial perspective also to be wary of using such terms unless you go on to clarify what you mean in the advertising. And so you should also ensure that your claims are self-explanatory. If a consumer needs additional information in order to understand the claim, you should provide this and give it sufficient prominence that consumers will see it, for example, by using an asterisk and making sure that the print is easily legible of any clarification that you give. If we could go on to the next slide, please. The next practical tip is to take great care over your substantiation, your evidencing of your claims. So you should consider before you make a claim whether it is something that you can measure, how practically you're going to get hold of the evidence that you'll need. If you're a hotel brand rather than an operator? Do you have access to the data that you need to verify this? Do you need to look at your contracts to make sure that your suppliers and the hotel operator is providing you with all the relevant data that you'll need to back up your claim? Then you'll need to take steps to gather and preserve the data and ensure it supports the claim. I would generally recommend, and it's normally necessary given the technical nature of most environmental claims, involving an independent organisation to test and confirm. The CMA guidance confirms that such evidence is stronger than your own in-house evidence. And if you end up in a dispute before a regulator over conflicting evidence, then the stronger and more independent and better informed the evidence that you're relying on is, the better. So you should also make sure that you're basing your evidence on real world conditions. So you can't be accused of cherry picking or hand picking the data in order to support your arguments. And finally, you should make sure that your claims are transparent. So if you're making a carbon offsetting claim, you should ideally explain the scheme that you've adopted for measuring your emissions and whether you're reducing emissions or merely offsetting them. And then finally, before I hand over, the last point to flag is that the use of logos and labels can be problematic. If we can go on to the final slide, thanks. So the CMA give the example in their guidance, which is obviously relevant to your industry, that we can see in the bottom right hand corner, of a green leaf logo accompanied by the words "trusted eco holiday provider." And they feel that that is likely to mislead. For example, if it's a scheme that the particular hotel operator has invented and is not independent, or if it's merely a label that they're using without there being any kind of independent third party that has given them this accreditation. So with that brief overview of the Energy and Environment Alliance guidance, I think it'd be really good to hear from Nick Beresford at the CMA. So Nick, if possible, perhaps you could share with the audience your thoughts on the EEA guidance paper, and also it'd be really good to hear how this fits with the various actions that the CMA has been involved with recently.
Thank you, John, and thank you to the EEA for inviting me to come along and speak to you all this morning, and good morning, everybody. We at the CMA, and I personally, really welcome this chance to come and talk to you, and we really welcome the sensible, practical approach to guidance that the EEA has taken. There's much in there that really chimes, I think, with the kind of approach and the kind of views of UK law that we at the CMA have taken in our own guidance. And there's a large measure of consistency between the two, I would say, in terms of the approach that we think businesses should take to their environmental advertising claims. So what I'm going to do is talk briefly, before we have some questions and a discussion, about what the CMA has done, why we've done it, how we did it, and what we're going to do next. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. So in earlier this year, we published what we like to call our Green Claims Code, which are 6 key principles based on existing UK law, mainly the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations of 2008, which are themselves derived from a maximum harmonisation EU directive. So they are reflective of legal principles that apply across the EU member states and the UK. And we distilled our view of the law into what we hope are 6 practical principles which are consistent with the law, and which, if businesses follow them, we think they're more likely to find themselves on the right side of the legal equation. So we think that businesses should take care to ensure that claims must be truthful and accurate, must be clear and unambiguous, must not hide or omit important information, that where they make comparisons, those comparisons are fair and meaningful, either as between versions of their own products or their competitors' products. That in making claims, businesses must consider the full life cycle of the product or service about which they're making their claims, and that claims must be substantiated. And if there is a unifying point or principle behind those, I think I'd say that it's this, which is that businesses should make claims that they can live up to, that the impression they give consumers is one that is borne out by the evidence, and that they tell consumers what they need to know to make informed choices. So actually, I'm not sure whether that is one single principle or something that's slightly multifaceted, but I think there are some relatively simple propositions that lie behind those principles and underlie the relevant UK law on which they are based. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So this here is a brief summary of the steps that we have taken. So we published our final guidance, as you'll see there, in September of this year, having gone through a consultation process over the summer. To complement that and to try to give it a little bit of colour and bring our code to life, we've launched a Green Claims Code microsite, which features some distilled and easy to read summaries of some of the aspects of our guidance, some quizzes and videos. And we are now engaged in a sort of compliance campaign where we're trying to promote visibility of our code, to visit different stakeholders and talk at different events to explain what we think that UK law requires and what we think the code sets out, and the practices that businesses should adopt. Moving on from that, we will be in the new year looking to move into more of a sort of compliance and enforcement phase. And that's not to say that there's an amnesty at the moment. The law still applies, and if we were to come across cases which we thought merited regulatory intervention, then we wouldn't hesitate to act now. But we are trying to speak to businesses and give them a chance to sort of understand where we are coming from, so that in the new year, if the chance that businesses are given to adopt their practices and amend what they do isn't taken, they are at risk of us intervening in a slightly more intrusive way into their businesses, and our programme will start early in the new year. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. So that's what we've done. I'm going to talk briefly about how we've done it and the sort of aims and objectives that we have pursued in doing so. So clearly a key driver for all of us here is that we're facing a climate emergency. And as part of that, by no means the major part, of course, but an important part nonetheless, is that consumers are increasingly concerned to make greener choices in the products and services that they buy. And sort of the counterpart to that is that businesses are increasingly keen to make green advertising claims. And one of our concerns is that that creates the opportunity or the incentive for unscrupulous businesses to cheat, as it were, to take shortcuts, to make claims about their environmental impact, but not to put in the hard work that backs up those claims, not to amend their practices and change what they do so that their claims are genuine and that consumers can make informed choices based on them, which are genuinely good for the environment. So we want to protect consumers so that they can make those sorts of informed choices. But we also want to protect businesses who play by the rules. And we want that to feed into what we sometimes call at the CMA a sort of virtuous circle. So we want businesses to take innovative steps when it comes to their environmental impact and credentials. We want them to make fair and accurate claims about those steps so that consumers can make the kind of informed choices I was talking about. And that in turn means that those businesses who do innovate are rewarded and they're incentivized to keep on doing that. So that's the kind of win-win situation we're ideally looking to create through our approach to applying and enforcing consumer protection law in this area. So if we could move on, please. Now, in putting together our guidance, we found ourselves up against a number of important challenges. Now, as John mentioned, there are no specific laws relating to greenwashing in the UK. And what we've got instead are the broad principles-based legislation in the CPRs, the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations, which in particular prohibit misleading actions and omissions and contain a list of specific practices which are banned. Now, those laws, as well as being principles-based, apply across sector, across the economy. So we've got a set of general principles in the law that apply generally. So we're faced with the challenge of coming up with a set of guiding principles that can be translated across industries where there are a whole range of products and a whole range of claims that could be made about them. So that's one of the underlying fundamental challenges. In terms of the sorts of claims we thought we ought to be most concerned with and how we might tackle those, our attention was focused to a large extent on the kinds of vague and general advertising claims that I'm sure we've all seen, where it's very easy for a business simply to claim of itself that it is eco-friendly or green. But those claims can often convey either an uncertain meaning or offer a very broad impression that the business in its impact on the environment is overall positive or has no negative impact in ways that often, frankly, will not be true. So that was one of the big concerns we were trying to address. Another is that the flip side of that coin almost is that if a broad general claim has the higher potential to be misleading, then a more specific and focused claim might correspondingly be more accurate. But that in turn raises the risk of businesses cherry picking and focusing on aspects of their business about which they can genuinely make a positive environmental claim, but at the expense of the broader impacts of their business and with the risk of creating an overall misleading impression. So balancing those 2 points was a critical factor for us, as indeed was the challenge of recognizing that where businesses do innovate and take incremental steps, even where other parts of their business may have negative impacts, it's important that they are able, in accurate and fair ways, to make claims about the steps they are taking. We're not in the business of producing unintended consequences and stifling innovation because it's too difficult and not worth to make claims about it and therefore not worth doing. Finally, for now, so I shall move on in view of the time, we're also keen to make sure that in our approach to the law, we took account of the fact that products and services and brands often have, in connection with their products, there's a sort of a full life cycle that needs to be taken into account, from conception, composition, construction, to use and disposal, all of which can have an impact on the environment, but not all of which can necessarily make for good advertising copy. So there was a need to think about ways in which we can bring to bear those sorts of considerations and make sure that we offer a view on how businesses can avoid committing misleading omissions in their advertising. And as I say, we try to distill some of those key concerns into those 6 practical rules of thumb. We weren't looking to write a legal textbook, but to set out some principles which we think, were businesses to follow them, as I say, they are more likely to find themselves on the right side of the law and unbothered in their business activities by the likes of the CMA. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. And I will try to speed up because I'm conscious that time is running on. As I said in the introduction, we are now in a sort of promotion phase, which will shortly move into a compliance phase. And as part of our preparatory work for that, we're considering where to focus our compliance monitoring and our potential enforcement action. And you won't be surprised to hear that our priorities like to be given to cases which have the broadest impact. And you might think of that in 2 ways. First, we want to target egregious bad practices, those which are obviously harmful to consumers. Alongside that, we want to change behaviour for the positive moving forwards. So we will be looking at the kinds of claims and the kinds of sectors which are likely to be influential to a large number of businesses and to protect the maximum number of consumers. We want to set precedents that can be generally applied and guide consumer and business behaviour in lots and lots of areas. That lofty ambition, I think, means that our involvement in this area is likely to be long-term. And this is a challenge that faces all of us, and the need to balance commercial imperatives with consumer law compliance and environmental challenges is one that we're all going to be facing, from here on in, frankly. And we will continue to work with government and other regulatory bodies to seek to maintain consistency and clarity in our approach and in theirs. So I think we just have one more slide, which is talking about the other aspect of our future work, which is it's not just the CMA which is interested here. Clearly, other branches of government are also thinking about how we can all work to support the UK's transition to a net zero economy and to meet our sustainability goals. And as part of that, the Secretary of State asked the CMA to offer some advice on the 3 questions that you see set out on that slide, which is whether current legal frameworks restrict or block initiatives, whether there are changes that could be made to consumer and competition laws that would help the UK achieve its net zero and sustainability goals, and whether there are other opportunities within the existing laws and the tools that regulators like the CMA have got to enforce them, other opportunities to work towards securing those goals. And we were asked to think about the extent to which consumer law might require provision of particular information or prohibit particular conduct in ways that could help achieve those goals. Now, we issued a document for consultation earlier this year, where our focus in particular was on whether there could be legislative or behavioural changes which go to requiring businesses to provide specific pieces of environmental information with their products and in their advertising claims, whether there are particular legal changes that might be required to deal with obsolescence, replacement or planned obsolescence of products and services, and whether there are legislative or behavioural changes that could be made to deal with overconsumption. And we posited a few proposals and thoughts on the kinds of remedies that might shape behaviour in those areas. We're due to issue our advice to government in January in the new year, and that is a work in progress for us at the moment. So that brings me to the end of what I was going to say. My final slide has a question on there for everybody, which we can leave as a rhetorical question, but there may be a chance to discuss as well, which is, what is the one thing the hotel industry would ask of government in the context of our response to the Secretary of State's request for advice? What's the one thing you think might be changed about UK law to help us all work towards our net zero and sustainability goals? So thank you very much. Thanks for the chance to speak to you. And I hope I haven't taken too long, and we'll have time to hear from everybody else and to have a discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. Well, that question, I think we should pose to our next speaker. Hadrian, how would you respond to Nick's question? What is it that the industry would ask of government?
I mean, that's a good question, Ufi. And I think, the presentation that we've just heard is really, really good in setting out what industry needs, which is really clear guidance on what is expected and on what the bodies of laws are that can apply to greenwashing and apply to the hospitality sector. Because I think one of the most important things when running a business and working in business is to have as much clarity and certainty as we can. And I think government can play a very important role in that. Definitely. And Hadrian, tell us a little bit about what Kempinski is doing to respond to the risks related to greenwashing. And also, please do give us your reaction on the guidance that has been published today. Yes, thank you, Ufi. I really read the final greenwashing paper with great interest. I think it's really good that we have an analysis now that is so user-friendly and accessible, that focuses on the laws applicable to greenwashing and that focuses in particular on the hospitality sector. I'm really looking forward to sharing this with my colleagues in the business because I really think we all benefit from this. I also was really pleased to see that this paper does not only concentrate on the legal and pecuniary aspects of potential greenwashing claims, but also mentions how important it is to consider brand reputation damage of greenwashing. And for a company like Kempinski Hotels that's been managing luxury hotels for 125 years, our brand reputation really is paramount. So that's something that we always have at the front of our minds. Now, addressing your question about what Kempinski Hotels does to avoid greenwashing, and talking about the brand reputation to begin with, I was talking to our corporate communications and PR teams specifically. We collaborate with them quite a lot. They're very well integrated in the company, and we work very closely with the Sustainability Committee. I having said that, our corporate communications and PR teams do work very much on promoting our group, but we don't actually promote our sustainability activity very actively. I think our approach to sustainability is really very authentic. It's in the DNA of the company and of the employees. So it's not really for us a PR opportunity to grab. Now, I say this, but of course I wouldn't be telling the truth if I said that we don't communicate about sustainability, because of course we do. But when we do, we really do a lot of fact checking, and we fact check all the facts and figures with the subject matter experts on that particular area of sustainability, whether it's the social, the corporate, or the environmental. So there, I think we really have the confidence that when we do communicate about sustainability, that we're doing the right thing and that we're really walking the talk. Then when it comes to analyzing and collecting data and to ESG reporting, we work also with an external expert organization. They're called EarthCheck, based in Australia, and we've been working with them since 2015. The majority of our hotels have signed up to EarthCheck, and they're also certified. And we're also looking towards getting our entire portfolio certified by EarthCheck. But in the meantime, all of the data that we collect, whether it's through EarthCheck or through our own internal systems, will be reviewed by EarthCheck, and not only by them, but also by their external auditors. So all the facts and figures that we collect on all the sustainability efforts that we have globally actually have a second and a third tier independent review, which gives us quite a bit of confidence. Then talking about the sustainability programs that we have, our approach is really a holistic one to ensure that we cover all different areas of ESG, following the UN Global Compact and EarthCheck ESG principles. And that way, when looking at this data qualitatively and quantitatively, we really have a broad spectrum and avoid greenwashing, for example, by just focusing on one punctual area, for example, an environmental effort that we've done and communicating about that whilst ignoring the other areas. And of course, building on that, it's not just about one thing that we do at one point in time, but we commit to measuring regularly and monitoring our ESG over time, because sustainability really is a journey. And we really seek to acknowledge that and really set our goals so that when we communicate about sustainability, we're very transparent. And then lastly, with our Sustainability Committee, which is actually composed of department heads and C-suite employees, we have a whole committee that is composed of experts in all of the different areas of environmental, social, and corporate governance. And this really enables us to mobilize entire departments in the company to leverage their expertise and to permeate sustainability throughout the entire organization. And with that expertise and these departments, I really think that we have more comfort there again that our sustainability efforts really have that expertise and that knowledge and those fact checking that we need from those experts. And I hope that answers your question. Back over to you.
Thank you very much, Hadrian. Yes, definitely answers our questions. Robert, turning to you, I was very heartened to hear Nick say that the CMA is focused on providing a level playing field for businesses who are making significant CapEx and OpEx investments in ensuring net zero carbon. You're definitely one of those. How do you respond to what the CMA is doing, to our guidance that has been published today? And please tell us more, particularly the definition that you would put around whole life carbon, which Nick also talked about as he was presenting the CMA's position.
Well, thank you, Afi, for the opportunity to speak this morning. So I'm managing director of a company called Lamington Group. It's a real estate business. We have been on a journey over the last number of years to basically set about creating, moving into sustainability and driving a net zero framework for our existing and our future estate. I got into it largely around a huge amount of sort of frustration and sort of bother, I suppose, by going and experiencing hotels who do have that claim of trying to encourage you to save washing the towels and the little try and avoid throwing away sort of little soap bottles in the showers, and basically making what are important steps to a sort of a more sustainable future, but they are actually on the grand scheme of things quite low impact. And so as the world, we all watch the news and we can see the effects of particular climate change, which is, I think, the biggest threat that we all face. Addressing things which are sort of at that scale, and knowing when consumers sort of are more educated and understanding that actually probably has a better impact on the bottom line than it does towards sustainability. These are areas of deep internal frustration for myself, where I thought it's very disingenuous and rather immoral that companies are able to sort of market themselves in a way which positions themselves as sustainable on a very, very sort of low a small fraction of the topic. And it's actually something which actually drove me to make changes internally ourselves. So the greenwashing report, I think is fantastic. I think it's it is actually so it's a practical framework which is enabling the whole industry and inside outside hospitality to basically look at how we can structure the work that we're doing in a consistent way and stick to guidelines which actually professionally and also from a consumer point of view we can be aligned on the right pathway to a genuinely more sustainable future, which is making sure that we are living in harmony with the world that we know it. So I think it's it's a massive credit to the team who have put this together, and I think it's it's fantastic from that point of view. We as a business have been fortunate where we're privately owned and have the ability to basically to drive down routes which we think are important, and sustainability naturally is something which has been important for a long time, but I think has really come to the forefront in the last number of years, particularly so. We basically about 3 or 4 months ago launched the UK, the first hospitality group, the first UK hospitalities hotels groups roadmap to net zero, launching by completing that by 2030, 20 years ahead of the Paris Agreement. It was very important that if we were going to launch a roadmap and to do it and to share it, it was going to be public, it was going to be transparent, and we were going to do it well ahead of like the sort of the minimum timeline which some other companies are committing to. And it was important that we put that detailed roadmap together with the process and the plans about how we're going to do it, so that our claims and our statements would be substantiated and we could show to be credible in what we were saying, because this is a topic which is very sensitive to a lot of people, consumers, a lot of groups who are basically very, very vocal around sustainable matters, and rightly so, and are potentially more vocal around this topic than they are in other areas of society. And so if we were, and myself and any other businesses to make claims, they've got to be basically very prepared to be challenged on that by consumers who are becoming more educated and more vocal, but equally professionals who are equally becoming more educated on the topic. And so if we're going to go down a pathway to state this is what our objections were, or so objectives are, then we need to be able to show in detail how that's going to be done. Otherwise, I feared myself we would be shown to be maybe discredible or not seeking to do this authentically. So just a few months after launching our roadmap to net zero, which looks at our existing and future estate, we've been working on a project in a hotel called Room 2 Chiswick in West London, which opened about 7 or 8 days ago, which effectively was a new build project, which we were on site about 2 years ago, which already had quite a lot of, has been built to BREEAM standards, BREEAM excellent, and had a strong building standards from the London plan. But effectively it was covering lots of different things, but it wasn't really necessarily tackling the thing which I regard to be most important in sustainability. And if an area that we could have the biggest impact, it would probably be on net zero, on carbon, because that's contributing to climate change. And ultimately that was the area that I wanted to dedicate our focus to, so that we specialised in an area and did that very, very well. And then over time rippled through and looked at the other areas of sustainability as we move forwards. So we started on a journey where the building's been built to, was under construction, but had quite strong environmental grades standards. And then effectively started 2 years of modifications, enhancements and improvements and innovation to effectively increase the performance of this building to be, on an operational level, to be 89% more energy efficient per metre squared than a typical UK hotel. So which is something which we're super proud of, and it will become, it's become very incremental in terms of how we minimise our energy and therefore minimise our carbon. But that was operational, and as our whole life, for looking at sort of the full 60 years of the sort of the building's sort of projected standing, that would actually only equate to about 10% of our entire carbon footprint. And again, it goes back to sort of my point about how if we were really looking to seek to focus on something which is important to climate change, it wouldn't be just to basically just focus on the 10% of our emissions. And it was vital that basically we looked at our whole life. So that was where we said, okay, we need to look at our embodied carbon, which is definitely way less understood. It's something which we'd already started construction on. But basically, it's far more technical. But it was important that we recognised that actually the embodied carbon was 90% of our emissions, and we needed to take into full account the entire picture. So we set about basically to effectively rebalance to zero our entire net zero, our entire carbon footprint, which includes the construction period, but it also include ongoing maintenance, repairs, and also deconstruction at end of life. That way we can basically say, and it's sort of with integrity, that ultimately our footprint is zero for our entire operation and the building existence. As a commitment going forwards, it's something which we've been able to achieve. There's been, the economics do stack for us on this, and there's lots of sort of long-term benefits for doing this. And it's a commitment we've made to basically only build to a whole life net zero standards for all our future estate. And our pipeline of 4,000 odd rooms by 2030 will also be built to this and thereafter. And I believe this personally, I just believe it's the right thing to do. I believe this topic, people can sort of play around the edges and be in greenwashing at the moment, but I feel it's important to align with the big trade bodies. We've got established practices, but equally knowing what those practices, all those frameworks stand for, because each of them can be quite specialist, and it's also knowing how each of our businesses want to basically specialize in what we do and how it best align with the values or the business model that we all have. So for us, it's focusing on net zero. And the kind of interesting topic we were discussing yesterday is how actually around whole life net zero, I've looked to have independent accreditation for our standards. And actually, there are no independent accreditations for whole life at the moment. There is for carbon neutral, but not for this. So it's interesting how I think the movement is going, but the importance of having independent accreditation gives all stakeholders, investors, developers, operators, consumers, local government, awareness and clarity over that we are doing what we say. I believe that's the right thing.
Well, I applaud you on everything that you're doing, Robert, and I also applaud the transparency that you have brought to the table. In terms of drawing the line to say, look, this is where we are today as an organisation in terms of carbon. And we know we have a long way to go, but we're on that journey. So I applaud you for that transparency. I think it adds real credibility to and authenticity to the communications that you are sharing. And you're absolutely right about the standards, which is why the EEA has partnered with BREEAM to actually create standards that are of the highest, sort of most rigorous, scientifically robust standards, but that do address the huge gaps which now exist given where we are, and certainly to ensure they're bespoke for our industry. Now, time is limited. We have just under 10 minutes, and there has been a flood of questions coming in from the audience. So what I'd like to do is take the questions that the audience members have presented, and I'd like to pose them to we have a number of questions, which is great, more than enough for each panelist to take one question each. So I'm just going to dive in, if I may. Robert, since we're with you, first question that came in was about the term sustainability. The question was, is the term sustainability overused? Is it meaningful anymore? And what about social and governance? Is that being overlooked?
I think that's a really good question. ESG as a topic is huge. I always use it as I always describe sustainability alone as an iceberg where you start scratching on the surface and then you just go down below the water level, and there's so much to learn, so many acronyms and terms and bodies, and it is a massive, massive topic. For a business of our size, we've got 2 full-time people in sustainability, which is equal to a lot of other departments. But ultimately, it was a focus that so it's a commitment that we said at the beginning that we'd focus on what we can make the biggest impact on, and then move to other areas which we believe we could have the biggest impact on as well. So environmental environmental, I believe, to be the most important right now. It's about building a framework for us personally, and then we can replicate that going forwards. But it means we are 100% focusing on our people, and that's ingrained in us as a hospitality business, as it goes without saying. We care about guests, care about people anyway, but the social is another topic. So for us, it's about trying to focus on the biggest impact and doing holistically all the other things which we think would be beneficial as quick as we can.
And if I could just add to that, while the EEA paper is focused on greenwashing and therefore more focused on environmental issues rather than sustainability more broadly, there is a short section on broader sustainability claims and flagging the point that there is a real danger in claiming that your business is sustainable if what you really mean is environmentally sustainable. And the principles we talked about, misleading advertising, absolutely apply to what you might describe as purpose washing, claiming socially responsible records. I can see Nick nodding there. I don't know if you had anything to add to that, Nick.
I was just going to chip in and say our guidance takes exactly the same position, which is that the principles we identify in relation to environmental claims can also apply to broader sustainability claims. I don't think there's a qualitative difference in the nature of the claims, perhaps, but not in the way the law applies to them.
Yeah. John, there is a question that you can answer referring to the guide. The question is, does the EEA guide address the need for common terminology?
So certainly the issue of terminology is addressed, and there is a section on being careful about what terms you choose when you make your claims. Talking about common terminology, I think the question then goes on to say that using the right terms and recognizing also that these have to be understandable both to UK and international travellers. Yeah, I mean, I suppose that the key point here is that absolutely it's important that consumers understand what the claim means. If the claim is ambiguous, then there is a likelihood that some, if not all, consumers will be misled. So it certainly does address that point. We don't stipulate. We've highlighted, and I highlighted this morning, so some of the terms which are more vague and therefore should either be avoided or be used with caution and perhaps with suitable clarification if used. But we're not saying you should only use these terms because the law isn't prescriptive in that way, and the regulator's guidance isn't prescriptive in that way. But I guess the key touch point is to think about, are your claims clear to the audience, and the audience will depend on where the consumers are based and what their native language is and how good their understanding of English is and so on. So you should be taking all these issues into account when deciding whether your claim is misleading or ambiguous or whether it's clear.
Great. Well, we have just 3 minutes to get through 3 questions. John, I'm sorry, not John. Can't pick on you again so soon, John. Nick, I'd like to pose 2 of the questions to you, if I may, please. The first question that you could help to answer is, do the greenwashing and advertising rules also apply to governments and public bodies like TfL? Actually, 3 questions for you, if I may, Nick. The second question that I think you could answer is, what typically happens when a company makes a misleading claim? Well, why don't you answer those 2 and then I'll ask you the third one in a moment.
Of course, thank you. Well, on the first of those, I've already cheated by typing an answer in the text, so I can deal with that quite quickly. So, as I've said in my written answer there, the CPRs, the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations, they apply to anyone who fits the definition of a trader who is engaged in a commercial practice. Now, and I think that is capable, therefore, of applying to public sector bodies. So a trader is, very broadly speaking, someone who's engaged in a commercial activity, and a commercial practice is something that they do to promote the sale of a product to a consumer. So I think the likes of TfL, for example, in promoting the sale of certain products, are engaging in a commercial practice to which those laws apply. And the same could go, I think, for more central government departments in respect of some of their activities. Certainly not it's not impossible by any means in principle. Depends what we're doing.
Mm. And I'm just going to add the third question in now, which is that you mentioned that businesses would be recognized, they would be incentivized for doing the right thing. Could you please expand on this?
I can. So to take the first of the final two questions, first of all, so what happens when a business makes a misleading claim? And there are a few possibilities. One is that it will be the subject of a complaint to the ASA and could be the subject of an investigation and adjudication by them. Another is that it's the subject of complaints to the CMA or to trading standards. Now, if we receive a complaint about a misleading claim, we would consider the nature of the complaint, the number of any similar complaints, the likely or possible impact of any intervention we might make. And if we were to decide to get involved, then the ultimate possibility is that we could end up taking the trader to court for an enforcement order under Part 8 of the Enterprise Act, which would be an order prohibiting the use of that claim, preventing its recurrence, and possibly including some financial redress measures. Now, that's the ultimate sanction, if you like. Prior to that, it's likely that we would engage as part of an investigation in some informal contact with the business to see if the matter could be resolved quickly and easily. There would be a formal statutory consultation stage 2 if that informal approach didn't work. That's a requirement we have to go through before we could take the matter to court. The matter at that stage could be capable of resolution by some written undertakings, but absent those, there is the possibility we would find ourselves facing off in a courtroom. And sorry, the third one was about incentivizing businesses who make sound claims. I think the way in which those incentives would be derived is, in a sense, indirect, which is the other side of the coin is if businesses who make false claims risk our intervention. Now, we level the playing field by making sure that those who cheat don't get the benefit of cheating. Your incentive to make good and sound claims is that you'll evade our action. You get the benefit of making those claims, and consumers respond favourably to them.
So the stick is the carrot.
Yes.
Okay, well, we are now a little bit over time, but I can't resist in asking this question that has been posed. And Hadrian, I'm going to pose the question to you, if I may, which relates not directly to hotels, but indirectly to hotels, because the question is around platforms such as Booking.com or TripAdvisor and other online search engines or online travel agent platforms. Many of them have actually got green accreditation schemes. And the question is, what role should they be playing, these platforms, in stopping greenwashing, in halting greenwashing from hotel groups that may advertise their green credentials falsely through the platforms that they currently have? And how can those platforms use their influence to make changes in this area? And how can those platforms provide more transparency around whether or not they're actually working to prevent greenwashing?
Thanks, Ufi. I mean, that's a very interesting question. And I wonder if there are people from these OTAs online listening today who probably be very interested to hear what I have to say. But I think that it's interesting because what I've experienced recently is that we've had a lot of MICE and OTAs and others contacting us with their own sustainability or ESG questionnaires that they require that we complete and fill in before they'll even consider Kempinski hotels for their business, which is interesting. And I think obviously they collect a lot of the information that we provide, but ultimately, it's us as the hotel operator who are responsible for providing the accurate information. So I guess the question is, are these OTAs going to set up departments of people who are going to do their own fact checking to check that the information that they collect from the hotel operators, brands around the world is accurate? Or are they going to rely on these greenwashing laws to bring their claims against the hotel brand when it turns out that the information provided is incorrect and liable for greenwashing claims? But I do think that it's really good that we have this kind of engagement, because even though it really keeps us all on the edge, that's exactly what we need. Because ultimately what we want is truthful, transparent, genuine, and authentic sustainability activity and communications. The more people we have checking up on that, the more we'll have that positive snowball effect that can promote sustainability around the world.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that answer. I absolutely agree and underline that collaboration is definitely the way to tackle what is the single biggest threat facing humanity that we've ever faced. This is I need to draw this to a close, I'm afraid. It is a very important topic, very interesting questions. We haven't managed to cover all the audience questions, but just for the audience members who have put questions up, if we haven't answered them yet, we will definitely send you answers. So to bring this to a close, I'd like to invite my panel members to share any final thoughts. Hadrian, any final messages or thoughts for our audience?
Final thoughts would be to really take a look at this greenwashing paper again, read it carefully, share it throughout your organizations. I think it's an excellent piece. And also, insofar as Kempinski is concerned, we'll be relying on this also as guidance for any communication that we do on sustainability going forward. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to everyone today and for the opportunity to be on the General Counsels Committee of the Energy and Environment.
Thank you, Hadrian. John?
I think having heard what Hadrian and Robert have said from the industry perspective really underlines to me the level of organisation that needs to go behind substantiating environmental claims. They're complex matters. It sometimes takes a village. It's not just a question of having a single person within your organization who will have all the data to hand. You really need to be organized and to have people speaking to each other, particularly in a larger organization like Kempinski. And you need to embed into your organization the right kind of communication structures and management structures that will enable you to ensure that in order to make what might be a short and simple claim on the face of it, you have all the data in the background that's being pulled through and collated and verified and gathered to back that up. So yeah, I think it's been interesting to note that kind of practical organizational aspect that we, as the lawyers who just review the claims and say, but show me the data to back it up, don't necessarily appreciate the effort that's gone into producing that data in the first place. But it's been great to be involved.
Thank you, John. Robert?
Thank you, Ufi. My last thoughts are that it's pretty clear that this sustainability train, is not turning around, and it's just really gathering momentum. So it really is about getting on board, and because if you don't get on board, it's going to leave. And ultimately, building as much awareness and around this topic and around the right way to report and to put the effort, all the efforts that we are making down into the right manner, using the framework like this. So I think this basically does allow us to act with integrity and gives us guidance on for those who are not, and helps to call them out. So I think it's been useful, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Nick?
Thank you, and thank you to everybody for a really interesting set of presentations and discussion. I think I'd just end by saying, please keep up the good work, and I hope that you never have to speak to me again, because if you do, it might mean that you're in trouble.
Likewise. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much for joining this webinar. Please do get a copy of the report. It is now available on the EEA website, and the address is coming up now, as you can see below. It's www.eea.international. Following this call, we will be taking the questions from the audience that we couldn't answer, and we will be adding answers to them, sharing a link to this recording of the webinar, and sharing a link to the report for everyone who has participated today. And I thank very much the speakers, and also, of course, special thanks to John, who is the lead author of this very important piece of work. Thank you very much, everyone.